Yeah, but we can turn the other one on. This one's not, one of them, this one's not on. We can have, should have three.
I thought, Jesus said that only one of them worked. But
Really?
not both of them. Yeah, that's what he said.
Oh, me.
When somebody ordered Diet Coke, the chemist will.
So since this is our first meeting, I'd like to call the meeting to order, the meeting of the Historic Preservation Committee. It is 6:31. If we can stand for the roll call, please. I mean, Pledge of Allegiance, sorry. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag, of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Lord, can you call the roll, please?
Of course. Committee Member Mortorana.
Here.
Committee Member Sabathia.
Here.
Committee Member Vonk.
Here.
We have a quorum.
So now we're going to do elections, so we can appoint a chair for a one-year term. Is there any nominations?
I move that Councilmember Sabathia be the chair.
Second.
Do you accept?
Yes.
Can you do the roll call, clerk?
Of course.
First nomination by Committee Member Martirana and second by Committee Member Vonk.
Okay. Committee Member Mortorana.
Aye.
Committee Member Sabathia.
Aye.
Committee Member Vonk.
Aye.
Motion passed.
What she likes to do. Script. Yep. To me. We will now move to item 2B, appointment of a vice chair for a one-year term. Are there any nominations?
I nominate Chris Martirana.
I'll second. With a motion from Committee Member Vonk and a second from myself, Committee Member Sabathia, we will take a roll call vote.
Okay. Committee Member Mortorana.
Aye.
Committee Member Sabathia.
Yes.
Committee Member Vonk.
Aye.
Motion passed.
All right. Committee Member Motorana has been appointed vice chair for a one-year term. One item, so we're moving to the consent section. There's one item on the consent agenda. Approved for a posting affidavit for posting. There is do we have anyone online? I can't see it. Yes. Okay.
And then Julianne's our consultant.
Okay.
And that is it.
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
That is a motion to approve by Vice Chair Mortorana and a second from Committee Member Vonk. Can roll.
Committee Member Mortorana,
Aye.
Committee Member Sabathia,
Yes.
Committee Member Vonk,
Aye.
motion passed.
All right. With that passing, we'll move to action items. There is one recommendation under action item: receive and review the historic preservation ordinance update and provide comments. Staff.
Hi, thank you so much for being here this evening. I would like to introduce Julianne Murphy from Rincon Consultants, who has been hired to assist the city in updating the historic preservation ordinance. I will now pass it off to Julianne.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me back. I have a presentation to go over some of what was in your packet for tonight. I guess, can I share that from my screen? Will that work for everybody?
You have co-host rights, so you're welcome to share your screen.
Okay. All right. Again, I'm Julianne Murphy. I am an architectural historian with Rincon Consultants, and I've presented to kind of a combination of this group in the past. So again, thanks for having me back tonight. Before we get into the proposed revisions to the ordinance, I wanted to review a little bit about how we got here. I presented about a proposed update to a joint study session of the Historic Preservation Commission, the Planning Commission, and City Council back in May of last year. During that presentation, we provided an overview and background of the understanding of the existing historic preservation ordinance. I highlighted some of the issues and opportunities for improvement for the current ordinance based both on feedback we received from staff and from my review of it and review of other ordinances throughout the state. And then we provided a list of recommendations for revisions for the historic preservation ordinance. At the end of that meeting, we received general support to update the existing ordinance with comprehensible, clearer language, while also providing legislation that maintains existing authority and simplifying it for use by city council members, commissioners, city staff, applicants, and the community at large. Since that time, city staff has been working with Rincon to draft updates to the historic preservation ordinance. The draft updated ordinance is intended to improve the clarity, usability, and effectiveness of the city's regulatory framework for the identification, evaluation, and treatment of historic resources. So the existing ordinance provides a comprehensive foundation for historic preservation, but it includes highly detailed and complex procedural requirements that can be difficult for applicants, staff, and decision makers to consistently interpret and administer. The proposed updates recognize and streamline the ordinance to create a more accessible and user-friendly structure while retaining the core preservation standards and policy objectives in place. As we approach this revision, we had the following goals. We wanted to maintain the overall authority of the program because at its core, it had some really good tenets. Provide revisions that offer improved clarity because there were quite a few sections that were consistently causing confusion for many people. Remove some unnecessary language that was creating some bloat in the ordinance, making it much longer than it needed to be, and produce an ordinance that is easier to navigate for all users, which came down to a lot of improving the clarity of the ordinance. So this draft that hopefully you've had a little bit of time to review includes some clearer formatting, better organization, less ambiguous definitions, more practical examples, more concise language, streamlined decision-making structure, and allows for more staff level decisions where appropriate. Key improvements included the introduction of clearer definitions, particularly distinguishing between minor and major alterations, and the establishment of a more straightforward review procedure. These changes allow for a more efficient administrative review of routine or compliant projects, while continuing to require discretionary review by HRB and Planning Commission for projects with the potential to significantly impact historic resources. So what I've provided here, and I know it's like a lot to take in, but I just wanted to kind of give a bird's eye view of the overall impact of the changes. This is a side-by-side comparison of the ordinance's existing sections versus the revised version that we have provided for your review. As you can see, we have maintained most of the existing sections. So that goes back to our core goal, is that we wanted to maintain a lot of the duties and powers that were in the existing ordinance. We didn't want to strip away any of the strength of the ordinance, but we did want to make it a little bit easier to navigate. Those sections that we have retained, we have worked to make the language a little bit easier to follow and streamline some of the processes. Overall, we have taken the ordinance from 30 pages of information down to 11 pages. So a comparison of what we had in the existing ordinance and what we've revised. Of the 16 original sections, 14 were retained and revised. We did remove 2 sections, which included section 110660 of the current version, which is the City of San Juan Bautista designated historic resources, and section 110670, which is the systematic inventory and identification of historic resources. I want to stress that we didn't remove the capabilities to do these things. We just addressed them more appropriately in different sections. So historic districts are addressed through the updated draft in relevant sections, including section 110670, which we call now pre-existing resources. And the importance and the role of survey and identifying historic resources is being retained. We've just removed kind of a lot of the excess information that was previously included in that section, but it still is referenced in both the definitions in section 110620 of the new version and remains part of the powers and duties of the Historic Resources Board, which is outlined in section 110640 of the new version. Just to kind of go back to what I was saying when we're trying to clean up some of the language, this is the existing section for the survey section of the ordinance, and it includes a lot of really great information. It's very detailed and provides some like best practices information on how to conduct survey and how to record resources. And these are great guidelines and are helpful, but can be better addressed in things like guidance documents and application materials rather than in the ordinance language itself. And so, as I was explaining earlier, we removed 2 sections, but we've added a new section, 1106-120, which is repair. This helps to clarify the scope of regulation. This is action that is review-based and not mandatory, meaning that the city can review and guide changes like coming to the Historic Review Board for approval for changes to historic resources, but it cannot compel upgrades or restoration beyond baseline health and safety requirements. So this is just kind of really supportive language that helps the ordinance to be fair, defensible, and implementable, just something that was kind of missing from the current version. And so this is a side-by-side comparison of how different topics are addressed in the historic preservation ordinance. So the intent of the ordinance, that section has remained nearly identical to what it is in the existing version, with some updated language. As I explained earlier, definitions are still there. They've been simplified in many areas. There have been many that were removed that were not used in other places in the ordinance. There were several definitions that were defined and then not replicated or used in the ordinance, so it didn't make sense to have definitions for some of those. And like I explained, we provided more detailed examples for some pivotal definitions, things that are used often by HRB for things like major and minor versus minor alterations. The Historic Resources Board, the roles and responsibilities have been updated to be more focused on the core duties rather than kind of best practices and things that are not really attainable. I'll get into a little bit more detail on what that means a little bit later in this presentation. And for the Register of Historical Resources, we've updated it to be consistent with best practices language. We removed automatic resource procedure based on guidelines from the Office of Historic Preservation and remove reference to the status codes. This can be a point of conversation discussion tonight, but what that means is, the status codes that are a tool that was developed by the Office of Historic Preservation for survey work was integrated into the identification of historic resources in San Juan Bautista because of their use in the 2006 survey that was conducted. And so those codes, while useful for like the Office of Historic Preservation or a professional who's reviewing those documents, is a level of detail that's not necessary in an ordinance. It's confusing, especially because it requires you to kind of go to the next step and find the definitions for those status codes. So it's also worth to note that those status codes have since been updated since the ordinance was adopted. So because it's not really meant to be a tool to be integrated into ordinance language, we've removed reference to them. The procedure for removing resources is largely the same. The city clerk duties remain largely the same. Slight plan review, we remove some process language that's more appropriate for an internal resource like a guidance book on how to do this type of work. And we provided some clarity on types of projects that can now go to planning manager review. The benefits and incentives section is largely the same, although we did incorporate some incentive language that was in the previous version of the ordinance that had since been dropped. We've added that back in. Showing of hardship language has remained largely the same. And dangerous buildings, we've simplified that. The current version included a lot of language from FEMA, which is a great resource, but in the potential scenario where there is a disaster where you're getting FEMA relief, FEMA will dictate the terms of that, and so it's not necessary to have in the ordinance. And then, like I've described a couple times here, one of the aspects we try to address is to provide better definitions so that administering the ordinance will be easier for staff, HRB, and council. I know one of the concerns we heard when we first addressed this back in May was that the Historic Review Board members and staff planners might not be familiar with some common language in preservation, and so those definitions were thought to be a useful kind of handbook in that situation. And we do understand that. We are very aware of the realities of San Juan Bautista being a small city with a small population with fewer resources than maybe a larger city has to draw on for things like a voluntary commission. We have also discussed the potential for this issue to be more appropriately addressed in some trainings to provide both to commission and committee members and to staff. And in conjunction with this effort, establishing things like a handbook or something of that nature instead of trying to force it all into the ordinance. So the major alteration definition, as you'll see here, what we've tried to do is to break it down into a little bit more digestible formatting. And so we've taken really the essence of what was in major alteration has remained largely the same, but what we've done here is provided a little bit more real life examples that occur in San Juan Bautista more regularly and broken them down into a way that's a little bit easier to follow instead of kind of just having this running list of things. And then we've done the same thing for minor alteration. You'll see here, we've tried to provide a little bit more detail of what that kind of work might look like, what maintenance work includes, what kind of window replacement would be appropriate, that kind of thing. And so one of the other kind of big picture things we had discussed at that May 2025 meeting was the somewhat currently cumbersome setup that you have with the relationship of the Historic Resources Board and Planning Commission being comprised of the same members, but being two separate bodies, and the kind of difficulties administratively sometimes that creates when you're making recommendations basically to yourself. And so we had previously presented the possibility of fully separating the two bodies. One of the challenges with doing that is that the city has a small population, and the requirements for review to remain a certified local government, which I'll touch on a little bit in the next slide, are challenging. And so what we've elected to do, and what's presented in this revised version, is that we've retained the current setup where the Historic Review Board and the Planning Commission are comprised of the same membership. But one of the changes that we did make for the benefit of some improved efficiency in this is to update the powers and duties so that the Historic Review Board is no longer only ever advisory to the Planning Commission. So what this does is for site plan and design review, the things that come to you most often, instead of the previous language of review and comment, we have review and render decisions. So this allows you to be the decision maker in those situations so that it doesn't have to go to Planning Commission. The procedures for registration have remained the same. In that instance, the Historic Review Board will continue to review applications for new listings and make a recommendation to Planning Commission to go to City Council, because that results in a change of the status of property. So we still felt like that second level of review was appropriate to keep in that instance. And so as a reminder, I think we talked about this a little bit when I was presenting in May, is that San Juan Bautista is a certified local government. The certified local government designation is a program where local, state, and federal governments work together to help communities preserve historic resources. It is jointly administered between the National Park Service and the State Historic Preservation Office, which is also called the Office of Historic Preservation in California. Participation in the program provides access to benefits of the program, including funding through grants and technical assistance through assistance preservation programs. In exchange for those benefits, some of the duties that a certified local government must have, you have to enforce appropriate state and local laws and regulations for the designation and protection of historic resources, establish a historic preservation review commission by local ordinance, which you have, maintain a system for the survey and inventory of historic properties, which you have, provide for public participation in the local preservation program, which you have, and satisfactorily perform responsibilities delegated to it by the state, which are flexible. So one of the things, I've spoken a little bit with the CLG coordinator at OHP about this update, so they're aware that we're starting this process. And one of the things I will float to you that was brought to me by this person was that, while CLG is a great thing and it's a point of pride for a lot of communities, it's not a requirement. So there's many places that do preservation really, really well, that are not certified local governments. The one detriment of not being a certified local government is the potential loss of that access to funding, but they would still be able to provide technical support. So it's not like if you were not a certified local government that OHP wouldn't provide you guidance should you ask for it. And so I don't want to dominate kind of the whole discussion. There's a lot to kind of go through tonight. Hopefully you've all had a time to review the new version that we've provided in your agenda packet. And so I just kind of wanted to open it up and make myself available to questions. Are there definitions that you think are missing or should be revised? Your input's really valuable because you're the people that are using this ordinance most often. And so I want to be really sensitive and responsive to your feedback on what we've produced so far. And so if there's any element of the current ordinance that was removed that you think should be reintroduced, I'm ready to discuss that potential. If there's anything that you think is still too kind of long, difficult to understand, you don't think is actually necessary, you've never seen it be implemented, it hasn't been essential for the development and use of the program, we can discuss that. And then I really want to stress too that this isn't a final effort, this is iterative, and that this is going to be part of one piece of this, that we also are intending to produce additional materials that include trainings, application checklists, guidance materials for both staff and for yourselves if you'd like it. So what kinds of things would be valuable to support this update? I would love to hear your thoughts on that. And so that's all I have for now. Yeah, like I said, I don't want to dominate the whole night. I'd love for this to be a little bit more collaborative. So I'm gonna stop sharing and kind of throw it back to you all.
Thank you very much. Before we close out the presentation, I wanted to get any comments from staff about the use of ordinance and changes and how you guys have been evaluating this.
On the staff level, as we've gone through it, we've processed a few different applications in the 6 months that we have been here, and really adding the examples into the minor and major alterations not only helps staff, but actually I think will help the public understand what falls into it. And the authorities of the resource board, I think, will, really giving them that decision-making power, I might help some of that recommendation clunkiness to the planning commission. And again, any decision rendered can be appealed to city council. So those are some of our my thoughts. Victor, would you like to add anything additionally?
No, I think you covered it well, Ariel. Thank you.
And I just also want to really thank Julianne and Margot with Rincon. They've been instrumental in this process. And so and they also do our historic evaluations for the city as well. And so we just really appreciate all the work that they've helped the city with.
Awesome. Thank you very much. All right. We will move to committee member questions. I always get screwed over by this, so I'm going to go in reverse alphabetical order. I'm never at the beginning.
Is that me?
Yes.
My last name starts with V as in Victor, at the end of the alphabet. Okay. First of all, thank you very much, Julianne. I thought you did a great job. Many of the provisions are the same, and when you streamlined some of them, I thought that was great. I really don't have too many quibbles. I do have questions and maybe some comments. And just to start off, I have a really fundamental question because it's been very confusing with the existing ordinance. And the question is, what historic resources are subject to review? There are references in the code to, quote, historic, listed historic resource, eligible resource, historic resource with an initial cap H, inventory of historic resources, and historic district. These are all sprinkled throughout the ordinance. And then there is the biggie, the register of historic resources, which supposedly the clerk has, and that is what accommodates or all of the historic resources that have been identified. But frankly, and I was involved since 2000 in developing the 2004 ordinance, which was a brand new, basically from scratch ordinance. Um, we don't have a register, as far as I know. The city council adopted our inventories. They've adopted the 1981 inventory. They've adopted the 2006 inventory, and that's what we've been using to identify historic resources. And by the way, that inventory, the 2006, was done with a certified local government grant of $25,000. And then we got another CLG grant for $5,000 to do the historic district in the downtown. And of course, there were a lot of volunteers involved in doing the inventories. So really what we're using is the inventory to identify historic resources. As far as I know, we don't, or that's been deemed to be the register, but I'm not sure we actually have a register. And so that needs to be fixed and clarified. You know, what is the governing document that identifies our historic resources? So that's my primary comment, and hopefully we can fix that.
Yeah, well, I guess
Yeah.
I don't want to
Okay.
step on
go ahead.
feet a little bit, but do you want me to respond while you go, or would you like me to wait until we get through questions?
Oh.
Or
Yeah, if you have comment on that, that would be great.
Yeah, I understand. This is one of the things we're looking to make clearer. So I think that's why there's like a lot of bloat language in the existing ordinance, because one of the things that it did is, by function of adoption of the current ordinance, it included the findings of that survey and added those properties which were found to be eligible to the San Juan Bautista Register of Historic Resources. So those properties that were surveyed were, by function of the 2008 update of the ordinance, were added to the San Juan Bautista Register of Historic Resources. So it's confusing because the ordinance itself was acting as a way to kind of capture those resources. We've simplified that language in the current version because that's already been done. So we don't need to like keep that language in there. We can just reference that this is an update that continues to do this. So I will make sure to review the language that we have now to make sure it's consistent, because it can be very confusing, especially when you start thinking too about the California Environmental Quality Act has a definition for historical resources, which includes things beyond what are just listed in the Register of Historic Resources. So it can get very complicated because the verbiage is very, very similar. So I will say that like the very most simple way to put it is that properties that are listed resources are those that are included on the San Juan Bautista Register of Historical Resources.
And-
Yeah.
Excuse me, but by listed, you mean in the 2 inventories?
Right. The 2 inventories have been adopted by virtue of ordinance to be the Register of Historic Resources.
I think it would help to clarify that in the ordinance itself.
Okay,
I-
yeah, I can look at making that clearer. And I think one of the companion things that would be useful to this, like I'm saying, is a map that clearly shows all of that, so that people who live in San Juan Bautista know whether their property is a resource or not.
Can I continue? Okay. So I noticed that there was no reference to the 1981 or the 2006 inventories. You did have some language that it was like pre-existing, something to that effect. But there's a lot of turnover in this city, and we've had city managers come and go. We've had planners come and go. So there's no institutional memory. And so I think it would be important to put in the ordinance itself that there's a 1981 and a 2006, and that would also assist applicants or people maybe who are buying a house. It should be put on the city's website so that they can do their due diligence and say, hey, let me take a look at this address and see if it's in the register or, in the inventory.
That,
Mhm.
would that not be covered by the map that she's talking about? Map and list of properties?
The map.
Julianne was just referencing to put all the properties onto a single map and a list.
Oh, yeah,
I
I
thought-
guess I missed that.
Did I hear you say that correct?
That's
Okay.
right. Yeah. I think one of the things to be able to streamline this information, because right now, you're sending people to a couple different places, or rather you're sending city staff when someone asks, they have to look at a couple of things to figure out whether something's listed or not. For us to get that all in one list, get it all in one map. And so, yeah, that's definitely one of the priorities of, in addition to the ordinance language, the whole program, giving it kind of a little bit of a facelift so it's much easier to use.
Okay, I just want to make sure that
Mm-hmm.
people know where to go to find it. And again, as I said, institutional memory can be short. A lot
Yeah.
of us are dying off, and we're the only ones who know about these inventories. Well, that's great. And then I went through the whole thing, so I do have specific comments. And, we probably want to talk about the major and minor distinctions as well at some point.
By all means, yeah. That's what we're here.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, not to
Okay.
steal the thunder on that, but I think we made a good, this draft makes a good step towards defining major and minor, but removal of any ambiguity and getting like maybe even more specific
Yeah.
on there is something I'm interested in.
Yeah, I think it's very helpful to make sure that the definitions are clear of what's major and what's minor. And so where to start? Okay, I'm looking actually at the language of .020 definitions, which is on my page 2. You didn't bring yours, so you don't have it. Okay. Okay. Okay, so here it says repair, replacement, modification, or new construction to a listed historic resource. So are you talking about the register then?
That's right. Yeah, but we can update that to say a property listed in this San Juan Bautista Register of Historic Resources so that it's much more consistent. I definitely hear what
Okay.
you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I'd like to focus on the street facing elevation or the side elevation. It seems to be, I think it needs to be made more consistent, and I believe under the Secretary of Interior, programmatic material, usually it's what's visible from the public right of way. I think that's the language that they use. So under B, it requires a permit if there's a significant alteration to a street-facing elevation or a side elevation. Then if you go down to B5, it says addition of square footage, which I assume would be, making an alteration. Addition of square footage to a building elevation that faces the street. So that's kind of different because somebody could be adding square footage to the side of the building, not just to the front facing street. And then if you look at D, it talks about the addition of a height greater than the existing building if the addition is visible from the street. So that's a little different again. And
Which one is that?
if you look at B,
Sorry.
and if you go to minor, under BD, it talks about additions on non-street facing elevations. So maybe
Yeah,
you-
I can talk a little bit about the intent, and maybe, we can work a little bit on verbiage that might be a little
Yeah.
clearer. I definitely see what you're saying. So the intent here was that, so generally the Secretary of Interior standards, which is really the guidance philosophy for how to treat historic resources, is that you want to avoid alterations to street facing elevations. The reason why we have side elevation is that sometimes a side elevation can be a street elevation, but generally, if you're making changes to the rear of a property, you have a little bit more latitude to do things like additions. But
Right.
we wanted to acknowledge that we don't want huge additions just because they're on the back of a property. So that's why it includes the language about a AD, sorry, maybe I should change these to numbers instead of letters. That any addition of height greater than that of the existing building if the addition is visible from the street. Not that those things wouldn't be allowed, but we want the opportunity for the Historic Review Board to be reviewing those types of things because sometimes that might be an appropriate alteration and sometimes it might not be. So that's really about the opportunity for it to come before a commission to comment on. But I
Right.
see what you're saying about some of this language that it can maybe be a little bit clear. I mean, I'm used to working with it, so to me, it's like, oh
Right.
yeah, this is super clear. But that's why this is helpful to hear
So-
from you.
I mean, if it's visible from the public right away, and then there's a review, and I know often there is a second story addition put on the back, like some of our bungalows here in town. They have an addition on the back. And so you still have the street elevation, it still fits. But the
Right.
back is not really significant.
Right.
So I know we have that quite a bit going on in town already. Okay, you're looking at me. I have another issue. Can I just keep going? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay, and then let me
Riveted.
see. Okay, we're under major still. B2. It includes the application of new exterior cladding or coating that changes the appearance, design, or texture. So when you say coating, I assume it also includes paint. And
The intent actually for major alteration was to no longer include paint color.
okay, well, that is an issue that has come up
That dog.
with the Historical Society in particular.
Are you talking
I
paint
don't-
color or paint type?
We're talking about color,
Okay,
actually.
just color,
Yeah,
not type.
color. If you see the Texas Lodge, they did a beautiful job painting that building. It's a 3-color paint job. Now look at the IOOF building. It is a huge gray, ugly blob. And, they painted it the same color it was before. And that building is so significant in our downtown. It's very large, it's kind of imposing. The owners should, in my opinion, be picking some nice colors that fit with our historic downtown. And a 3-color palette for something that large would be really very attractive
And appropriate.
and appropriate. Yeah. So that's why paint is controversial.
I'll
And
say
it-
from a professional kind of point of view, paint color is not typically regulated as part of the appearance of a historic resource unless it is integral to the material. So generally, things like painting a red brick would be something that would be reviewed by historic review body, but painting wood that's been painted before is not typically something that's regulated by a historic ordinance because paint is easily changed. It's not integral to understanding the defining character of a historic building 90% of the time, most of the time. That's not necessarily the case with something like brick or stone or something that wouldn't be typically covered in paint. That's to say some municipalities do it. I will say it's not a popular thing to include in an ordinance. And for those reasons, we removed it because it's for a property owner that has like a typical craftsman house. The paint color doesn't matter. I think you've mentioned a couple examples of maybe some particularly important properties in the city, but do you want to hold all listed properties to the same standard of like 3 or 4 spectacular ones? So that's the balance that has to be struck, and that's the reason why it, for the purposes of this version, was removed from being considered a major alteration. And that's just, some background information for you all to consider.
I know Sherman-Williams has a historic color palette, and that's where we referred people. Oh, did you want to?
I want to jump in.
Okay, no, please, go
This is your
ahead.
time.
No,
So-
no, please.
No, when you said it doesn't mean paint, the comment I made was that dog don't hunt. Where the atrocities committed on historic buildings with paint. If the planning commission hadn't directed Jim West in the color palette for his house, it would have been painted green and orange, the colors for the construction company that he worked for. Literally, that's what he said. And I disagree that they are not. I mean, when you're talking about Victorians, to me, color is a defining architectural characteristic of the style, is it not?
It's popular now to paint Victorians very elaborately, but historically, many of them were just all white. So that's one of the things that allows, personal expression on people's property. One of the other standards, the Secretary of Interior standards, is looking at the reversibility of an intervention. And because paint is easily reversible, it's not considered to be a major alteration in like the grand scheme of changes to historic properties, not necessarily the definition we're discussing right now.
Well, the paint quote I got makes it pretty major to my pocket.
Sure.
And I live in a less than 900 square foot house. So I think one of the thoughts that was kicked around, has been kicked around, is something that Kara actually mentioned just as an aside, I think a moment ago, was Sherwin-Williams, for instance, has a historic paint palette. And that one of the things that has been discussed or informally is somehow including that as perhaps part of the design guidelines. And I would feel a lot more comfortable with this if there was a reference to the project being consistent with the design guidelines. And I have more to say on that particular subject later, but that I think might be an accommodation that could be workable. Yeah.
As we look through this, and I think we've been checking Zoom attendees and the riveting crowd we have here. I think we're okay to continue with the questions and comments. But we'll still call for public comment in a few moments. One of the things I'm struggling with, and I struggled with while reading this, I would hate to have a neighbor with like a jet black house next door, or like a Addams Family black and purple palette. Like striking that balance with the freedom for personal expression, like Julianne mentioned, like any guidance you have on how to walk that line would be helpful.
And we're just talking about historic houses.
Right.
If your house is not historic.
Understood, but looking through that,
Black.
not in my neighborhood. There are CCNRs.
Oh, okay, good.
There for a reason.
Um,
But like I understand there's a difference, but that general that there's a balance there, there's a pull from either direction, right? Like you want to be able to, maintain the historical,
view of something, but also provide folks the freedom for personal expression. There's some. Absolutely.
And then something Julianne said, something about brick, painting brick. I think there's something coming up or something pending in town that it kind of touches on that. So why would one not be allowed to paint brick?
Well, it's not whether someone is allowed or not. It's the consideration of, is it a defining character of the property? Sometimes brick will be for sure, and sometimes it's not. It's just one of the components of the structure. And so that's one of the things that when a property comes to Historic Review Board to review, that would certainly be something they could question. In the case where a property is part of its defining character is its brick construction, generally painting that brick would be advised against, because once you paint brick, it's really hard, no matter how many, manufacturers say that paint for brick is fine. It's hard. What it does is it disintegrates the brick over time because you create a moisture barrier between the brick and the paint. And so for the long-term preservation of a building that is brick construction, it's not generally advisable to paint structural brick. Sometimes brick is not structural, sometimes it's facade, especially kind of later examples of it, and painting it might not be an issue for terms of structure in that instance. But one of the things to look at is whether, one, the brick is character defining to the significance of the structure, and two, whether it's integral to the material. So whether it is structural brick, and whether the color itself is an important component of it, like red brick versus buff brick versus gray brick. That's manufactured and chosen for a reason generally in historic properties. So those are things that the HRB should consider when discussing whether certain interventions would be appropriate or not.
So shouldn't that be called out in the ordinance somehow under major?
Well, it would be something that changes the appearance, design, or texture of a property. So I guess coding there is doing a lot of the work because it changes the texture of brick versus painting over painted wood doesn't change the texture.
I think I see the line of thought Ms. Vonk is having. And so I think we could either define coding, like maybe
Mhm.
have a definition of coding that spells that out, or maybe we add some more details into that example. So
Yeah,
we could
certainly.
go back and look at
Okay.
that.
And maybe talk about paint, maybe as was suggested through the design guidelines or something. Because we also have sandstone buildings.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
No. Okay. Oh my gosh. Under minor. I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate if I can. Okay. So in-kind exterior siding replacement. I'm not sure what you mean by in-kind. Does it mean if you've got big old redwood siding that's 100 years old, but now you want to put in hardy board, which is a cementous kind of siding that looks like siding, would that be okay? Would that be minor then if somebody wanted to take off? And then somewhere it's about 50%. I don't remember where that was. If you want to take off 50% of the redwood siding and you want to put on hardy board, is that in kind? I'm just playing devil's advocate, and obviously, I don't know where I used to work. We had the 90% rule. If it worked in 90%, it was good. If it didn't work in 10%, 10%, it was good. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so we have in kind defined later in the ordinance, and we've provided a definition that says means replacement of a building material or finish with the exact same materials as the existing, or with substitute materials that are similar in size, scale, and character as the original. So if someone had like really old redwood siding, and for whatever reason they want to replace it, they would have to first demonstrate that it was reasonable to replace it, that there was something, deficient. Um, and wood wasn't an option for whatever reason. Who knows what maybe circumstances are extant in the future. And they provide an example of a hardy board or a new substitute product that looks like the historic and mimics it in all the ways that are retaining the character defining features. So the size of it, the general texture of it, so that if you were to look at the building, it looks as it did when it was built or, when it was designated. So that would be kind of the threshold. And so, in kind, material for material is always like the desired kind of replacement. But we also wanted an opportunity to acknowledge like that might not always be possible if people have, one really common example might not exist so much in San Juan Bautista, but is like a slate roof. A slate roof to replace with the slate roof is very expensive. And now the market has really, really good replica materials made out of things like rubber tires that looks like slate. And so if you're standing on the ground and you look up, you think it's slate. And so that kind of thing is appropriate. So that's why we kind of have enough flexibility with in-kind to allow for those substitute materials to the point where they're still appropriate. So again, that's the intent there.
Councilmember,
Yeah.
committee member Vaughn. I'm going to pause you for a moment
Yeah.
and ping pong. He's going to jump me over here, but let him.
Oh.
Oh no, you got notes. Yep.
I made a comment in the and maybe it's not appropriate for the definitions. Maybe it should live elsewhere. But I do think that deferring at some point, or the using the design guidelines as sort of the threshold or minimum standard to which they're going to be held accountable, both in major or minor alterations. So again, that resides elsewhere, but I think that needs to be spelled out. And I will say that the design guidelines probably need to be the next thing we work on if we're doing that. Okay. I don't have a lot of comments. I think you guys did a great job. I'm very much very happy with this. Now, having said that, here's what I think we need to fix, right? In section under powers and duties, letter A, letter B.
What page are you?
This is on page 5, almost near the middle. It says new construction within designated historic districts and the city gateways and on vacant land with known archaeological features or sites. There's no definition of city gateways. I don't know if that needs to be added, but
Okay. Yeah, that's language that was carried over, and city gateways are, I think, defined in the design guidelines. Yeah, so
okay.
but that's
no,
a good
enough.
it's a good note. It's a good
Yeah,
note.
it just was sort of hanging there, and
Yeah.
it made me uncomfortable.
hmm
At the end on page 9 near the bottom, under benefits and incentives for historic resources, number 5, letter C, it refers to guest houses on lots less than the minimum required lot size. Guest houses I don't know what that means. And I think it needs to be defined.
Is that maybe a nod to an ADU and maybe
It-
change the language?
It may be. I don't know what it was referring to, but it needs to be defined.
Or change to a more commonly accepted
Something.
definition?
Yeah, well, I think, yeah, it's just not clear what that means. Somebody can come in and say, oh, it's a guest house and it's a free for all. I can do whatever I want. And that's what makes me nervous because we play fast and loose here in this town. Procedure for registration. On page 7, there's talk about 6 and 7, getting your property registered, and then there's an inclusion in historic districts. It's really talking about inclusion in a new historic district, not
Right.
okay.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
I think you should clarify that it would be a new historic district or maybe an expansion of or something. Cause it says if it doesn't get acted upon, then the whole district, the proposed district would be null and void. And I mean, we certainly wouldn't want that to be implied if some alteration were made downtown.
Yeah.
And this whole question of inclusion brought to mind my personal experience, because there's nothing really about the exemption, and this may be a case of it really belongs in the inventory guidelines as opposed to in the ordinance. But I'm reminded of my personal experience. I live in a 100-plus-year-old home on 4th Street that has been remodeled multiple times. And unfortunately, all the historic character pretty much remodeled out of it with badly done work in the 60s. And we went to the city to get a permit for a new roof and were told that we were on the resource register and but the house had not been specifically evaluated. So we had to have an evaluation done, which we did, and it was deemed not historic. But I don't know if this is the place for addressing that process, because that became a huge fight here at the Planning Commission several months ago, and I suspect contributed to the departure of one of the staff members, because it was her contention that after I had done the historic review, had the house judged not historic, that if I then came back after doing the roof and wanted to repaint the house, that I would have to have another historic review done.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that wouldn't be
Yeah.
the case.
No,
And I
but
think, yeah, I think one of the things in the existing ordinance, which we've tried to pare down a little bit, is that there is the city has an obligation to identify historical resources when there is a project that is subject to the California Environmental Quality Act. And so the current version of the ordinance includes a lot of language that is intended to support those activities
right.
that aren't maybe necessarily part of identifying historic resources for the benefit of local review. And so we've tried to kind of untangle that a little bit so that people don't experience what you experienced, but we also still want to make sure that the city is able to do that work to be able to comply with state regulation. So that's one of the things we did kind of pare down in this version.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. But I guess that somewhere that needs to be codified, explained, detailed somewhere.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering where you envision detailing that. Or that.
Yeah, that's a good kind of segue. I don't, I want to share a little bit something I've put together that's like very, very basic, but just to kind of
Well, just tell me what, you don't have to, I don't, as long as it's on somebody's radar and it's on somebody's list.
Yeah, one of the things we're looking at is like providing something like this for applicants where they know whether, what they're going through is like, do I have a historic resource? Yes. Is it minor or major? Something like this for applicants to have a flow chart or a checklist that makes it clear for both applicants and for city staff to know how to route what kind of applications are coming to their desk. So, if it's not historic, it goes to standard planning review, which might include having to do an evaluation if the conditions are necessary to do an evaluation or not. So the intent is to kind of make that more clear in the permitting environment rather than laying it all out in the ordinance. And part of the reason for that is state law changes so fast.
Can you put that back up
Oh,
for me,
yeah.
please?
Yeah.
I'd like to comment on that too.
Me, yeah. Because the situation that I encountered was listed historic resource. Yes. So.
Well, I think what happened, what you're describing is maybe that your property had been surveyed but not evaluated. And there was maybe a misunderstanding because of the status codes. And that's one of the reasons why we were looking to remove them is that
Right.
what you're describing to me, what I think happened is
Uh-huh.
that your property had a 7R listing, meaning that someone came and took a picture of it and surveyed it, but they didn't evaluate whether it was historic or not. So actually what you had was not a historic resource, but it could be whatever, I don't know the circumstances of it, but
From the city's standpoint, it was listed in those surveys and was therefore included in what's the definition? The register.
no.
As a
So
historic
it was
resource.
included. I think that's the nuance there. And it sounds like what happened to you was not correct. Is that a property that's been surveyed is not included in the San Juan Bautista Register of Historic Resources. It has to be evaluated and designated. So it sounds like the first step was done. It had been surveyed, but it actually had not been evaluated. And so it wasn't a listed historic resource. It was an identified potential resource, and that's where the
Okay.
problem occurred.
Well, and so what I'm getting at is there's a step missing in this flow chart.
Sure, it would happen here. You would still have to figure out whether you needed one or not, depending on the type of project. But this is, again, a super, super basic example of what we're hoping to provide with like the application materials to people so that is clear what the route they need to go is.
Well, and I'm telling you, I'm lingering on this because this is going to be 75% of the issue
Yeah.
people are going to have with this ordinance. Because there is a ton, probably the majority of the properties in town are over 45 years old.
Right.
And almost none of them have had an official evaluation done. So
Mhm.
you have a massive number of properties in this town that are going to require this step. And it is absolutely imperative that this be made clear immediately in the process to everybody that comes in looking for a permit for anything.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely hear you.
So Julianne, I guess just to add a little bit to that is essentially it had been evaluated and once evaluated determined it was not a resource and then it had come back around that it needs to be evaluated again. And I think
Well,
some
No, that's a separate issue.
Mhm.
I'm saying from the outset, this does not anticipate me walking in the door. When I walked in the door, I was told, yes, it's a listed historic resource.
It was in
That's
the
what it was.
inventory. It's listed in the inventory
It's listed in the inventory
as
and
possibly historic.
and by the previous ordinance was then accepted into automatically the register. Now, was
Which
it
is what
done
we were just
properly? No,
told.
obviously, but this is where the confusion comes in and no one could explain it very clearly.
Mhm.
And so it just causes mass confusion. And then it's a question of, well, where do I go to get this done? And I've got a it's just, this is where this whole thing came from, was that issue that I'm describing causing heartburn for people. The reason we're here today is not because of, it's because of that step, no one understanding it, no one having any grasp on it, and the city being incapable of clearly defining it for everybody. So that's why I feel great about the ordinance, because it cleans up the contradictions that existed between minor and major. And, that needs a little bit I would agree. Kara has pointed out maybe a couple of glitches, but for the most part, I think it's fantastic. But this issue of getting the actual register clean and clear, and having a method for the public to understand what they're facing, to me, is the most important thing we're addressing.
So do you suggest, because we had mentioned the map and the list,
Great.
should we add a reference of that separate resource?
I'm not sure. But I think I love this flow chart. I just think the flow chart's incomplete.
Right.
That's all.
I
I think
think
the flow chart and having those resources available is fantastic. But I think, hey, I guess it's job security for somebody, because the register, I think, is badly in need of cleaning up.
yeah. So with a clean register and map,
Would be
very clear.
would be a lot better.
But
With that step, this is clear, pretty clear.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think that's the missing piece.
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
thought we were told that the inventory was the register.
That's right.
Yeah, but so the inventory, that included evaluation. There were many properties in the survey, which is also an inventory of potential resources, that were identified but not evaluated, which it sounds like your property fell
Yeah.
into.
Yeah.
And so
I think most in town. Yeah.
So those are not listed, and they're not included on the register. But I'm definitely hearing
Have
what
you-
you all
have
are
you-
saying. I
have you
understand the
looked-
confusion.
Julianne, have you looked at the register?
I have, yeah.
Because it
Well,
was shown to me, and my house was listed in the register.
You actually saw a register? I've never seen a
I
register
That's what it was. I don't know.
because usually the inventory is the register.
Yeah.
so the inventory, just in a general term, and this is, I think, maybe some helpful background, and I think where things probably got.
Can I pause you for a second? And so I
Sure.
think that this is a good spot for an action item for our next meeting. A review of the register and list with some background and Julianne, you going through what, the complete lists, and then the designation of all the things that were, we'll have the final list, but the things that were on the original survey and the reason why they are not
Yeah.
would be super helpful, but so that we can go through that resource list. And then I think that clears up a lot of the confusion and I just don't want us to sit here and go back and
I
forth
agree.
without having
Totally agree.
This is obviously an issue that needs to be addressed.
Okay.
And
Yeah. And I'll just say, like, generally, the term
Uh-huh.
inventory is like a planning tool for planning staff to know what is a listed resource versus what's a potential resource. Sometimes
Well,
departments keep an inventory of things that are not officially designated, but they know there's potential there in case a project comes up, they know what to ask for. So
Yeah, your comment, or Kara's comment, initially didn't make sense to me. One of her comments didn't make sense to me because I had read your definitions of inventory and historic resource, but that's where you deal with this now. The reality of what we have here in the building is these inventories, but in your definition, is the process.
mhm,
Inventory in sort of the colloquial here is that's the register.
right.
So, and that's where that's one of the reasons we're having challenges.
I mean, I agree with everything you said. So if we're because we do have properties in town that are actually listed on the National Register,
Mhm.
and those are identified, but it's just a handful. I
Mhm.
can only think of three, you know,
Mhm.
offhand. And then, of course, we have our historic district.
Mhm.
And that was another, I'll get to that later. I also have a historic house. I had to get the expert to do a report, and it was deemed historic. So yay, the planning commission even gave me an award for the restoration. And so now it's historic. It has a name. It has a date that it was actually built. So, but it's still listed in the inventory as potential, you know?
Okay, interesting.
So does that get somehow, how does it get
I-
on the register?
I think our
Paying a fee to get it on the register.
No,
Did you
I
just
think what-
volunteer to? So that's what I'm asking for. I'm asking
Yeah.
for us to
Good
to
call.
as an action item or
Yep.
agenda item for the next meeting is for us to go through the lists
Yeah.
and
Looks
you know, have
like
done the
Jordan's got it.
and do that so that there are no more because it's hard to evaluate any of the documents
There.
without having the definitions and the data
Yeah.
Mhm.
done.
So most of them are potential. And so they all have to have that report done.
Yeah.
Which people are going to be very unhappy about doing because
that-
it's expensive.
Those are all the comments I have.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, let's pause here for public comment, Zoom or on in person.
We do not have any public comment on Zoom or in chambers.
All right. And then I think now it'll be appropriate. If you have any other questions or comments, committee member Vunk.
I actually had a lot, but now I'm a little distracted. Well, let's see. Where do I start?
I might suggest to city staff too, this doesn't have to be the end of this discussion. We can certainly take written comments too, while we work on revisions and updates, from this group.
She's flipping pages on her yellow pad.
Okay, let's see. What is this? Am I?
I thought I had.
Okay, this is under the definitions. Character defining features. Okay. I just wanted to point out that the national, that actually the State Park Service, they have, or maybe it's a National Register Bulletin, I'm not sure, that talks about what are character defining features. And there's also something called Preservation Brief 17, how to identify character defining features. And usually windows are and doors are character defining features of a house. And so then I had a question about minor and replacement. It says under minor, let me see if I can find it. And these are examples. And it includes additions, windows, doors, and exterior siding that are non-original. So I guess I'm concerned about somebody coming in and wanting to put in a vinyl window with the pop-in mullions or whatever they're called, the dividers. With that, let's say somebody comes to the counter and they want to replace the windows. I replaced mine with wood windows, wood because they were originally, this is on an addition anyway. What about vinyl windows? Are those okay? Would that be a minor? You know what I mean?
So
It's those kind of questions that are.
it depends on if the windows were character defining or not. So in some instances, for a property, windows are essential to the property. Sometimes they're not. And especially in the case where
Right.
they've been changed many, many times, I think, the city has an interest in acknowledging the cost of preservation sometimes, especially for things like windows. And if there's a property that's historic that has vinyl windows, especially like on a secondary elevation, and they want to replace those with vinyl windows, this allows the flexibility for the city to approve something like that. if you have a property that has like, really elaborate divided light windows on the primary elevation of a craftsman home, and that's clearly part of the character that defines the historic integrity of the house, and someone comes in and suggests replacing those with a vinyl, that would not meet the definition of a minor alteration.
That makes sense.
So you
It
have to, I
sounds
mean, I
like-
think one of the hard things about doing this is that, the city has to look at each application as it comes to them, because every resource is unique. And so you have to look at the circumstances of the property and the proposed alterations. And so, we try to be as authoritative and provide enough guidance in this as we can, but we also want to offer enough flexibility that you're not challenging homeowners to do things that are not attainable. So that's kind of the balance we're trying to strike. But that's why these conversations are helpful to have, to make sure that you, as the experts of San Juan Bautista, kind of see what we're trying to achieve here, and are able to achieve that with this ordinance update.
Would there be some additional language you think that would assist in that?
Well, character defining is defined in some of these bulletins that are put out by the National Park Service and the National Trust. But it sounds like planning staff needs to be up to speed on what are character defining features when somebody comes to the counter, and the planner has to decide whether it's a major or minor issue.
I think this is like
But
with a
this-
definition.
We're talking about a historic property only,
Yes.
right?
yes.
And so the written evaluation will describe what the character defining features are. That, I mean, you
That's a good point.
did that. I had it done, and it was like, yeah, I have no character defining features remaining in my house. Every single window had been replaced, changed, or moved.
Yeah.
As an example, but I think that's the baseline is we're only talking about historic homes, and so they have enumerated what the character defining
That is true.
features are.
Right. Yeah. Okay, I have another one. I'm looking at Historic Resources Board, term of duty, number D. I have it on page 4. And the recommendation is that the board members serve on a rotating basis. And I think under our current ordinance, that term has to correlate with their planning commission term, because the Historic Resources Board and the Planning Commission are one and the same person. And so it would be difficult for a person who's on the Planning Commission then have a different term, or an HRB member have a different term from the underlying Planning Commission term.
I think you may have
Really?
misinterpreted that.
Oh, okay. Historic Resources
What page is that?
4, item D. Historic Resources Board members shall serve a term of 4 years. The terms shall be served on a rotating basis to ensure continuity in board operation. The first 2 years, 2 board members shall be appointed for 2-year terms, and 3 board members shall be appointed for 4-year terms. Under our current ordinance, the term has to correlate with the Planning Commission term.
Yeah, it seems like that. Seems like the term of duty shall serve a term of 4 years, and that could probably be the end of that because it says in B
Find somewhere
that it's
else.
the same members as the.
Yeah, the intent here is just to make sure that you don't have board turnover all at once. So you're not getting a whole new class, so that there's some continuity. So, but I can look at how to revise
But
that
if-
language to be
if-
clearer.
Yeah. But if that's not contiguous with their planning commission term,
Yeah.
like it has to be contiguous with their planning
Yeah.
commission term, even if it means
Yeah,
Board
it's
turnover.
absolutely a great call out, because it could be confusing.
Okay, we can look at revisions for that.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out what my notes are. Okay, let's see. There was something about the fee. Like if you wanted to be on the register, you had to pay a fee. But I think some of the properties are, the city's going to be putting them on the register. I don't know of anybody who's going to apply to be on the register, especially if they have to pay a fee. What's the point of being on the register? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that this goes back, it relates to the comment I made earlier. I think that those two sections about inclusion or procedure for registration is really talking about somebody that would, for whatever reason, was wanting to do it. But yeah, actually, that's a good point, because it's like it's almost like it's automatic based on the age of the state guidelines call out what would be included, right?
Well, for identifying historic resources, not for listing them. So for something to be designated, there has to be action taken by the city to designate those properties. So we've provided a couple of ways for properties to become designated. One is that someone applies to be designated. They're really proud of their property and they want to be designated, so they submit an application for designation. And then there can also be an application that comes from the city who wants to designate the property. So there's like more than one avenue to designation.
Gotcha. Okay.
But ideally, you want people to participate. You want them to want their properties to be historic. That's the ideal situation. And that's why you have incentives for having historic property. So that's the carrot to the stick.
I think I just have one last thing here. And it's just a comment on dangerous and imminently dangerous buildings. And there was, in the current ordinance, there's quite a lengthy thing describing the process. And the reason that was put in there is, and actually it was recommended at one of the workshops, historic preservation workshops. By the way, I have been attending the conferences for about 40 years or so. Anyway, like if there's a major earthquake here,
Yeah.
and the facades fall off the buildings and whatnot, and I happened to be in Ukiah when that earthquake hit, and we were having a conference, just happened. So we had a lot of engineers who were specialized in historic preservation, who were able to preserve a lot of those buildings in Ferndale, which is a very historic Victorian kind of town. Because a regular engineer, city engineer, they say, oh, this is gone, red tag, it's got to be demolished, it's dangerous. But if you get a specialized engineer, they can say, well, this facade can be rectified or can be braced, that kind of thing. They have more expertise in the finer points of saving historic buildings. So that's why that section was so long, because it talked about bringing in the engineers and the experts and all that kind of stuff. But it does say here, well, demolition, when such action is required for public safety, which cannot be rectified through the use of the California State Historic Building Code. I don't know if we want to specify that a specialized engineer needs to come in to assess it. Anyway, that's, if there's a major fire or an earthquake here, we're kind of,
Yeah, I think, that's why we included the provision that if it's not an immediate threat to public safety, that HRB can have a public meeting on it for that reason. Then there can be a discussion on, what potential avenues there are for preservation, if any.
Yeah. And I just wanted to point that out. That's why, we had all of that verbiage in there. But hopefully this will satisfy it the way It's been, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Marianne, was it?
Julianne.
Julianne. You know, I think she covered it fairly well. If I have any other comments, I'll submit them in writing. And I think we should maintain our CLG status because we've gotten a lot of benefits from that.
Awesome. Thank you. I think there's a suggested motion here.
Do you have anything to add?
No, when I read through this, my eye for things, I tend to keep my nose out of things that I don't have expertise in. But reading this as like a layperson trying to understand it, like it's much easier to read, and so that's why I don't have the general. My biggest comment was around the specific definitions, so that like you can imagine reading the definitions and being like, you just imagine the argument coming from it of somebody making a case on one side of it, and like, well, there's just as much language here to support the other argument, and so getting real specific where we need to in those places, I think and there's probably some sharpening there. That's the only comment I had. Everything else is educational for me, but loving the fact that it's pared down because the 30 pages, I'm getting lost.
Overall, I think she did a great job.
Agreed. I agree.
Okay, so I am going to entertain a motion, but with the addition of the requested meeting to talk about the actual register and to go over the register before we send this to City Council or to the Planning Commission HRB for further review. So I would entertain a motion to.
Can we talk about paint too? Is that part of it? Or whatever issues we've raised.
No, there's not, this is not a, so we've received it and reviewed it. I don't think, I mean, we've provided feedback to staff at this point.
I
I'm
have
not sure
instructions
that-
from. I follow what she tells me to do.
Okay, and
So you believe we should entertain and vote on a motion, Liz? You think that's appropriate?
to what end?
Review of the register.
I would also, a friendly inclusion, that when we return with that, we also return with some red lines of how we had tried to address
That would
today's
be helpful,
comments.
yeah.
Okay,
So are we going to have another meeting?
yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Can we set the meeting date?
Or sorry, how much time in the conversation we had today, how much time would you need to work on this in order to return for an additional meeting? Would it be like in about a month?
Yeah, it wouldn't take me long I mean, this has been very useful and I appreciate all the feedback and you all taking the time to read all these revisions. I know it's a lot. It wouldn't take me a long time to review these things and I would be able to address them, Ariel, as you're suggesting in like a track changes version, for consideration at a future meeting. I will say I have a very busy public meeting schedule for the rest of April. So I would just say for me, my May clears up, but the rest of April is looking pretty crunched as far as like my commitments for other public meetings I have to do. But I could get you a revised version for them to look at before we convene again.
So it sounds
So-
like we get a track changes version sometime soon, and we reconvene and meet again in May.
May.
May is
Oh.
the
Yeah, I'm
second-
going.
the
go ahead.
third or fourth week in May, or should work for me.
Yeah, towards the end of May is good. I'll be
Yeah.
Yeah,
gone
towards
in
the
May.
end. I'm going to the California Preservation Conference,
I'm going
which
to
is in
Italy.
Riverside.
Oy.
I'll be there
Oh,
too.
that
I'll see
sounds
you.
better.
I'll be in Italy.
That sounds better.
That's certainly better than Riverside.
So
Okay.
is that clear, or do you need me to try to do the word soup?
I move that the committee ask staff to work on the described revisions and comments and to bring back the the existing register for review and a possible description of an ordinance or inclusionary language that would describe how a color palette might be incorporated into this process.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay.
So motion made by Vice Chair Martorana and seconded by Committee Member Vonk. Can we get a roll call vote?
Yes. Committee member Morderana.
Aye.
Committee member Sabathia.
Yes.
Committee member Vaughn.
Aye.
Motion passed.
Awesome. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Awesome. Do we have to vote on that too?
Motion carried.
Nice.
You're supposed to.
Aye.
Can I get a roll call vote?
All in favor, say aye.
No.
There may have been some
We
other
don't do it.
things that need to.
Liz,
be
what
fixed.
say you?
Victor, can I get a roll call?
Yes. Committee member Morderana.
Aye.
Committee member Sabathia.
Yes.
Committee member Vonk.
Aye.
Motion carried.
The time is 8:06 and this meeting is adjourned.
Yeah.
Thanks all. I'll see you in May.
Thank you.